Montana Territory, November 17th, 1887. The little girl had been waiting for 18 days, 6 years old, 42 pounds. Her name was Grace McKenna, and she sat on the wooden steps outside Thornton's General Store in the mining town of Silver Creek, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself like that was the only thing holding her together. The town moved past her, miners with coal dust in their lungs and silver dreams in their pockets, saloon girls with painted faces and tired eyes, the preacher with his black Bible and white collar, ranch hands riding through on their way to somewhere that mattered more than here. Some left bread when the store owner wasn't watching. Some left nothing at all. Most did not stop. They told themselves the same comfortable lie. Her father would come back. This was not their responsibility. Someone else would help her. Someone always should. Grace believed it too. She believed it with the stubborn faith only a child can have when the alternative is too terrible to consider. Her papa had told her to wait right here on these exact steps until he came back from the mine with money for food and a place for them to stay. So she waited. The wind cut through Silver Creek like a knife through canvas, carrying the smell of coming snow and the metallic taste of the mountains. Winter was close. Grace had no coat, no shoes. Only a faded blue dress that had once belonged to her mother, now worn thin and pale from too many days outside, too many nights curled against the storefront wall. In her right hand she clutched 17 cents, 3 nickels and 2 pennies. The last money her papa had given her before he walked toward the mine shaft that swallowed men whole and sometimes never gave them back. She had not spent a single coin. On the morning of the 18th day, a stranger rode into town. His name was Cole Brennan, though he had not spoken that name aloud in nearly 3 months. He was 35 years old, but his eyes belonged to someone much older, someone who had seen things that carved lines into a man's face and put shadows in places light could not reach. Cole was a drifter now, though that word did not quite capture what he had become. He had been a cavalry scout once, before the guilt. Before the 8 years of running from a thing that followed him, no matter how many miles he put between himself and Wyoming Territory. He rode a bay mare named Sorrow, because naming her had seemed important at the time, and because the word fit the way he felt every morning when he opened his eyes and remembered he was still alive. Cole had been thinking about warmth when he saw her, about food, about finding work for a few days in this dying mining town before moving on again, the way he always moved on, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions he could not answer. Then he saw the girl. He slowed his horse without meaning to, something in his chest tightening like a fist around his lungs. The girl did not look up when he stopped. She just kept watching the road that led to the silver mine, as if she expected someone to appear at any moment, as if hope was something you could summon through sheer force of will. Cole dismounted slowly. His boots hit the frozen ground with a sound like bones breaking. He tied Sorrow to the hitching post and stood there longer than he intended, studying the way the girl shivered, the way her small hands trembled from cold and hunger and 18 days of waiting for a father who was never coming home. Finally, he spoke. "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl looked up. Her eyes were the color of a summer sky, clear and bright and far too serious for someone so young. Those eyes reminded him of another pair of eyes, another little girl, another lifetime ago, when he had still been someone worth knowing. "My papa," she said without hesitation. Her voice carried the musical lilt of Ireland, the accent her father must have brought with him across the ocean to this hard land that broke men like kindling. Cole felt something sink deep inside him, settling in his stomach like a stone dropped into dark water. "How long have you been waiting?" Grace thought for a moment, tilting her head in a way that made her look even younger than 6. "The lady inside says it's been 18 days. 18 days. The words hung in the cold air between them like an accusation. "Where did your papa go?" "To the mine," she said, and there was pride in her voice, the kind of pride children have in their fathers before the world teaches them differently. "He said he would come back when he had money for food and a place for us to stay. He said to wait right here so he could find me." Cole glanced down the road toward the mine, then back at her. He noticed things a man learns to notice when he has tracked people across deserts and through forests and over mountains that touch the sky. He noticed how thin she was, how her wrists looked like small branches that might snap in a strong wind. He noticed the way her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. He noticed the 17 cents clutched in her hand like a talisman against the universe's indifference. "What's your name?" "Grace," she said. "Grace McKenna. My mama was Grace, too, before she went to heaven when I was born. I'm Cole." He knelt down so his eyes were level with hers, and for the first time in 8 years, he made a decision that was not about running away. "Have you eaten today?" She shook her head. "Yesterday?" Another shake, smaller this time, as if admitting it made the hunger more real. Cole took a breath. The kind of breath a man takes when he knows his life is about to change, when he knows that walking away is no longer possible, when he knows that sometimes you do not choose your redemption, it chooses you. "There's a place across the street," he said, pointing to a building with a faded sign that read, "Hayes Medical and Meals. I can see these steps from the window. You can see the road. If your papa comes, you'll be the first to know." Grace hesitated, looking back at the steps as if leaving them might break some sacred promise. Then she looked at his face, studying it with the careful attention children give to adults when they are trying to decide if trust is warranted. "You promise I can see the road?" "I promise." She stood slowly, her legs unsteady from sitting in the same position for so long. Cole offered his hand. It was rough and scarred, the hand of a man who had worked hard and lost harder. Grace's hand was cold and impossibly light when she placed it in his, like holding a sparrow that might fly away at any moment. They crossed the street together, this broken man and this waiting child, and neither of them knew yet that this moment would change everything. That 18 days of waiting was about to end, but a different kind of waiting, the kind that leads to healing, was just beginning. Inside Hayes Medical and Meals, the air was warm. The smell of beef stew filled the room, rich and thick and almost overwhelming after 18 days of nothing. A woman behind the counter froze when she saw Grace, her hand stopping halfway to wiping down the wooden bar. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen enough suffering to recognize it in others. Her name was Ruth Chen, and she had come to Silver Creek 20 years ago as an indentured servant sold by men who treated human beings like livestock. Now she owned this building, this business, this small piece of the world that she had fought for with everything she had. "You finally stopped," Ruth said quietly, looking at Cole. Her voice carried no judgment, only a weary kind of relief. "Someone had to," Cole replied. Ruth nodded, then turned her attention to Grace. "Hello, little one. Are you hungry?" Grace nodded, but she did not move toward the food. Instead, she walked to the window, pressing her face against the glass so she could see the steps across the street, so she could watch the road that led to the mine. Cole understood. He pulled out a chair at a table by the window and gestured for her to sit. Grace climbed into the chair, still watching the road, still waiting even as Ruth brought a bowl of stew and a piece of bread that looked like it had been baked fresh that morning. "Eat slowly," Ruth said gently. "Small bites. Your stomach needs to remember how." Grace ate the way starving things eat, at first with trembling hands and desperate speed, then slower as her body began to trust that the food was real, that it would not disappear, that this was not a dream from which she would wake still cold and still hungry on the wooden steps. She did not speak. She only glanced at the window again and again, her eyes tracking every movement on the street, every rider, every wagon, every possibility that this might be the moment her papa returned. Cole watched her and felt the weight of a question forming inside him, heavy and unavoidable. A question he had been running from for 8 years. a question that followed him across territories and through seasons and into this moment. What happens to a child when waiting is all she has left? Ruth brought him coffee without asking. She sat down across from him, her voice low enough that Grace would not hear. "Her father is dead." The words landed like stones. "How long?" 16 days. Cole closed his eyes. So Grace had been sitting on those steps for 2 days after her father had already died. 2 days of waiting for a man who was already buried in the rocky ground behind the Catholic church on the hill. How? Mine collapse. Second day he worked there. Tunnel gave way. Killed him and 2 others. Ruth paused, her hands wrapped around her own cup of tea. Her uncle took the insurance money. $200. Told no one. Left her out there to wait. Cole's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Why? Ruth met his eyes. Because he's waiting for her to get weak enough that no one will fight him when he takes her. Where? Denver. There's a man there, Clayton Burke. Buys children nobody wants. Sells them to families who need servants. Some of the children are lucky, most are not. Ruth's voice went flat, emotionless. The way people sound when they are talking about horrors they know too well. Grace's uncle has sold 4 children in the last 6 years. All orphans, all alone, all disappeared. The rage that filled Cole was white-hot and familiar. It was the same rage he had felt 8 years ago when he found his wife and daughter frozen in the snow, when he realized that his choice to leave them behind, to scout ahead for a safer route, had killed them as surely as if he had pulled a trigger. Where is this uncle? Ruth nodded toward the window, across the street. Big building with the green door. Victor Harlow. Owns the saloon and the bank. Owns half this town, truth be told. And the sheriff, all of him. Cole looked out the window at the building Ruth indicated. It was large and well-maintained, the kind of building that spoke of money and power in a town where most people had neither. Does Grace know? Ruth shook her head. Nobody's told her. Doc Hayes wanted to, but he's afraid. We're all afraid. Victor has the law on his side. Blood rights, legal papers, and Sheriff Dobbs in his pocket. Cole stood up. Where is this Doc Hayes? Upstairs. He runs the medical part of this place. I run the meals. Tell him I want to talk. Ruth studied his face for a long moment. You planning to do something stupid? Cole looked at Grace, still eating slowly, still watching the road. I'm planning to do something right. Ruth stood as well. There's a difference between right and smart, Mr. Brennan. I know. Cole put money on the table for the food. But I stopped caring about smart 8 years ago. He walked upstairs, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. The second floor was quieter, cleaner, smelling of carbolic acid and laudanum and all the things doctors use to fight death even when death usually wins. Doc Samuel Hayes was 62 years old, with white hair and tired eyes and hands that still shook sometimes when he remembered his son dying at Gettysburg, bleeding out in his arms while the cannons roared and the world ended over and over again. He looked up when Cole entered his office. You're the one who brought the McKenna girl inside. Cole nodded. Doc Hayes gestured to a chair. Sit down. We need to talk. Cole sat. Tell me about Victor Harlow. Doc Hayes took off his spectacles, cleaned them with a handkerchief, put them back on. It was the kind of ritual people do when they need time to gather their thoughts. Victor Harlow came to Silver Creek 12 years ago with money from somewhere back east. Bought the saloon, then the bank, then pieces of everything else. He's smart, charming when he wants to be, ruthless when he needs to be. And Grace? Doc Hayes' face went hard. Her father, Patrick McKenna, was Victor's younger sister's boy. The sister died 10 years ago. Patrick was good man, honest, hard worker. Came here from Boston 3 months ago looking for a fresh start after his wife died in childbirth. Victor got him a job at the mine and then killed him, Cole said flatly. Doc Hayes shook his head. No, the mine killed him. But Victor made sure it happened. Patrick was about to leave Silver Creek, said the mine was too dangerous. Said he'd rather be poor somewhere safe than dead here. Victor talked him into one more shift, promised him a bonus, told him to bring Grace to the store and wait there, that he'd collect her after work and they'd celebrate. Cole felt sick. So Victor sent him into a mine that was about to collapse. Doc Hayes leaned back in his chair. I can't prove it. But the foreman quit the next day, left town in the middle of the night. And the tunnel that collapsed? It had been showing cracks for a week. Does Victor know Grace is here? He knows. Doc Hayes looked out the window toward the saloon. He's been watching, waiting to see what you'd do, waiting to see if you were just passing through or if you'd become a problem. Cole stood up. I'm a problem. Doc Hayes stood as well. Then you need to understand something. Victor has Sheriff Dobbs. He has Judge Morrison. He has the legal right to take that girl, and there's nothing you can do to stop him unless you can prove you're a better option. And you're a drifter with no home, no steady work, no ties to this place. In the eyes of the law, you're nobody. Cole walked to the window, looking down at Grace. She had finished eating and was standing by the glass again, her hand pressed against it, her breath fogging the pain as she watched for a ghost that would never come. Then I'll become somebody. How? I'll get a job, a place to stay. I'll make myself into someone the law can't ignore. Doc Hayes laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think it's that easy? You think Victor will just let you waltz in and take his merchandise? Cole turned to face him. His merchandise? That's what she is to him. $200 walking around in a little girl's body. He's already made the deal with Burke in Denver. The train leaves in 2 weeks. If you want to stop this, you have about 14 days to become a man worth more than the price Victor already negotiated. Then I better get started. Cole walked back downstairs. Grace was still at the window. He knelt beside her chair. Grace, I need to tell you something. She looked at him with those summer sky eyes, and he saw hope there, bright and terrible, and about to be shattered. Your papa loved you very much. Her face went still. Where is he? Cole took her small hand in his. There was an accident at the mine. He didn't come home. The silence that followed was deeper than any sound. The world kept turning. The town kept breathing. And a little girl learned that sometimes waiting, no matter how faithful, no matter how long, cannot bring back what is lost. Grace did not cry at first. She did not scream or pull away. She just sat very still, as if her body had forgotten how to move, as if the news had frozen her from the inside out. No, she said quietly, like she was correcting a simple mistake. No, you're wrong, he promised. Cole felt his chest tighten until breathing hurt. I wish I was wrong. He would not break a promise. Her voice was getting smaller, younger, more desperate. He said he would come back. He said to wait right here. I know he did, and he meant it. But sometimes things happen that are bigger than promises. Grace stood up suddenly, shaking her head. I waited every day. I didn't leave. I did what he said. You did everything right, Cole said gently. This is not your fault. Then why? The word broke into pieces as she said it. Why did he leave me? He didn't want to leave you. He would have come back if he could. Grace took a step back, then another, as if the floor beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. Her breathing got faster. Her hands started to shake. Then the tears came, all at once, like a dam breaking, grief pouring out in waves that shook her small body. Cole did the only thing he could. He pulled her close, wrapped his arms around her, and let her cry into his coat. She was so light, so impossibly small, like holding all the sadness in the world compressed into 42 pounds of heartbreak. Ruth came over quietly, put a hand on Grace's back, said nothing because sometimes there are no words that help. Grace cried until she had no tears left. Then she cried some more, dry sobs that sounded like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Cole held her through all of it, this stranger who had stopped when everyone else had walked past, this broken man who knew exactly what it felt like to be left behind. When the crying finally slowed, Grace looked up at him with red eyes and a face wet with tears. What happens to me now? The question hit harder than any blow Cole had ever taken. I don't know yet, he said, because lying would have been worse. But I'm going to figure it out. Will you leave? Cole thought about leaving. About how easy it would be to walk out that door, get on his horse, and ride away from this problem that was not his to solve. He thought about 8 years of running, 8 years of telling himself that staying meant facing things he could not bear to face. Then he looked at Grace's face and saw his daughter Rose looking back at him, saw the moment he had left Rose and his wife Emily behind in the snow while he scouted ahead, saw the moment he returned to find them frozen and dead, saw every mile he had run since then, trying to escape the truth that you cannot outrun yourself. No, Cole said, and the word felt like an anchor dropping, like the end of running, like the beginning of something he did not have a name for yet. I'm not going to leave. Promise? Cole had not made a promise in 8 years. Promises meant responsibility. Promises meant staying. Promises meant caring about something more than the next town, the next job, the next escape. But he looked at this little girl who had waited 18 days for a father who was never coming home, and he made the only choice that mattered. I promise. Grace leaned against him, exhausted from crying, exhausted from 18 days of waiting, exhausted from being 6 years old and alone in a world that did not care. Ruth brought a blanket, wrapped it around Grace's shoulders. There's a room upstairs, small but warm. She can rest there. Cole carried Grace up the stairs. She weighed almost nothing. In the small room there was a bed with clean sheets and a window that looked out at the mountains. Grace climbed onto the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. Can I see the steps from here? Cole looked out the window. You can. Grace nodded as if that settled something important. Her eyes were already closing, sleep coming to claim her whether she wanted it or not. Cole? Yes? My papa used to sing to me when I was scared. What did he sing? Grace's voice was barely a whisper. Tu-ra-lu-ra-lu-ral. That's the old Irish lullaby her mama sang. Cole did not know the song. But he sat in the chair beside the bed and he stayed, and sometimes staying is its own kind of music. Grace fell asleep still clutching her 17 cents, still holding on to the last thing her father had given her, still waiting even in her dreams for someone who would never come. Cole sat in that chair until the sun went down and Silver Creek grew dark. Then he walked downstairs to find Doc Hayes. I need to know everything about Victor Harlow. Doc Hayes looked up from the ledger he was reviewing. Everything is a lot. Then start with what matters. They sat at the table while Doc Hayes laid it out. Victor Harlow was 48 years old, born in Philadelphia to a family with money and connections. Came west after some kind of scandal that nobody talked about but everyone knew involved a young woman who ended up dead. Bought his way into Silver Creek with cash and charm, built his empire one piece at a time. The children started disappearing 5 years ago, Doc Hayes said. Always orphans, always alone, always with Victor somehow connected. The law never looked too hard. Orphans die all the time out here. Sometimes they run away. Sometimes they just vanish. How many? 4 that I know of. Maybe more. And nobody stopped him. Doc Hayes met his eyes. Who was going to stop him? The sheriff works for him. The judge owes him money. The town depends on his businesses. And the children? They had no one. Until now, Cole said. Doc Hayes leaned forward. You understand what you're taking on? Victor will not let Grace go without a fight. He'll use the law. He'll use the town. He'll use everything he has to take her. Let him try. You'll need more than determination. You'll need a job, a place to live, character witnesses, legal standing. Then help me get those things. Doc Hayes studied him for a long moment. Why? You don't know this girl. You don't owe her anything. You could ride out of here tomorrow and nobody would blame you. Cole thought about Rose, about Emily, about 8 years of running from the moment he should have stayed, about 18 days of a little girl waiting on cold steps while a town walked past, Because somebody has to stop, he said simply. Doc Hayes nodded slowly. Then we start tomorrow. I know a rancher who needs a foreman, man named McAllister. He's honest, tough but fair. If he'll hire you, that's steady work and a place to stay. I'll talk to him. Doc Hayes stood up. For tonight, there's a room in the stable out back. It's not much, but it's warm. You can sleep there. Cole walked out to the stable. It smelled of hay and horses and the kind of honest work he had been avoiding for years. He lay down in the straw and stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside and the horses shifting in their stalls. Sleep did not come easily. He kept seeing Grace's face, kept hearing her ask, "What happens to me now?" Kept remembering another little girl who had asked him why they had to wait in the snow while he went ahead to find a safer path. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, Cole made a decision. Not the kind of decision you make with your head, but the kind you make with whatever part of you still remembers how to be human. He was done running. When morning came pale and cold, Cole walked to the mercantile and bought supplies with money he could not afford to spend. A coat for Grace, shoes, a blanket, food that would last more than a day. Then he rode out to McAllister Ranch, 5 miles north of Silver Creek, where the land opened up into valleys that seemed to touch the sky. Samuel McAllister was 67 years old, weathered by sun and wind, and 50 years of raising cattle in country that broke weaker men. He met Cole at the corral, where a green horse was testing the fence like it was looking for an escape route. "You looking for work?" "Yes, sir." McAllister studied him with eyes that had seen enough men to know which ones were worth trusting and which ones would steal you blind. "What can you do?" "Horses, tracking, survival skills." Cole paused. "I was cavalry, 7th Regiment, Scout Division." "Cavalry." McAllister nodded. "That explains the way you sit a horse. War, some, mostly tracking. Leading wagon trains, finding water in dry country." "Why'd you leave?" Cole met his eyes. "Because I made a mistake that cost lives, and I've been running from it ever since." The honesty seemed to surprise McAllister. "Most men lie." "Lying is easier," Cole said, "but I'm done with easy." McAllister walked over to the green horse. "This mare threw my last foreman, broke his arm. Been looking for someone who can handle difficult horses and difficult situations." "You interested? What's it pay? $40 a month? Cabin on the north side of the property? 3 meals a day if you want them. Hard work. Long hours. But honest." Cole thought about Grace waiting upstairs in that small room, thought about Victor Harlow making plans to sell her like livestock, thought about every mile he had run trying to escape the ghost of who he used to be. "I'll take it, but I need to be clear about something first." McAllister waited. "There's a little girl in town." "Why? Because I have a daughter buried in Wyoming who I didn't save, and I'll be damned if I let it happen again." The words hung in the cold morning air. McAllister nodded once, sharp and final. "Then you've got the job. And if Victor Harlow wants trouble, he can bring it to my ranch and see how it goes." They shook hands, and Cole felt something shift inside him, something that felt almost like hope, though he barely recognized it after 8 years in the dark. That afternoon, Cole rode back to Silver Creek with a job, a place to live, and the beginnings of a plan. He found Grace in the room upstairs, sitting by the window, watching the road, even though there was nothing left to wait for. "Grace, I found work. A ranch north of here. There's a cabin. It's small, but it's warm. Would you want to come with me?" Grace looked at him with those serious eyes. "For how long?" "As long as you need." "What if you leave?" The fear was naked in her voice, honest and terrible. "I'm not going to leave," Cole said. "I made you a promise." Grace thought about that for a long moment. Then she stood up and put her small hand in his. "Okay." They walked downstairs together. Ruth was waiting with a bundle of clothes, things she had gathered from around town, donations from people who wanted to help, but not enough to get involved. "These should fit her," Ruth said. She paused, then looked at Cole. "You know what you're doing?" "No," Cole admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." Ruth smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Then you might just have a chance. As they stepped outside into the cold afternoon, a man was waiting across the street. Tall, well-dressed, expensive coat and polished boots. His face was handsome in the way that makes people trust you right before you hurt them. Victor Harlow. He smiled when he saw Cole, but the smile did not touch his eyes. Mr. Brennan, I presume. I hear you've taken an interest in my niece. Cole stepped forward, putting himself between Grace and Victor. Your niece has been sitting on those steps for 18 days. Where were you? Victor's smile got wider, giving her time to realize her father wasn't coming back, teaching her that the world is a hard place. He looked at Grace. Hello, Grace. I'm your Uncle Victor. I've come to take you home. Grace pressed closer to Cole's leg. She's not going with you, Cole said quietly. Victor laughed. And who exactly are you, a drifter who rode into town yesterday? You have no claim to her, no legal standing, no right to interfere with family business. I have the right that comes from being here when you weren't. Victor's expression hardened. The law says blood is stronger than sentiment, Mr. Brennan. Grace is my responsibility now. I'll be taking her. No. The word was flat, final. Victor studied him for a moment. Then he nodded, as if confirming something he had already suspected. I see. Well then, I suppose we'll let the courts decide. Sheriff Dobbs will be bringing paperwork tomorrow. Custody hearing in 3 days. I'm sure you'll want to retain a lawyer. He walked away, his boots clicking on the frozen ground, and Cole knew with absolute certainty that the fight had just begun. That night, in the small cabin on McAllister Ranch, Cole built a fire while Grace sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her new coat, still clutching her 17 cents like a lifeline. Cole? Yes? Why did my papa die? The question had no good answer. Sometimes there is no answer that makes sense, that makes the pain less, that changes what happened. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. It's not fair. It's not right. But it's true. Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Are you going to die too? Cole knelt in front of her. I can't promise I'll live forever. Nobody can. But I can promise that I will fight as hard as I can to stay, and I will never leave you alone again. Even if Uncle Victor says you have to? Especially then. Grace looked at him with eyes that had seen too much for 6 years. You're different from the other people who walked past. How? You stopped. And sometimes, Cole thought, as he watched the fire burn, sometimes stopping is the bravest thing a person can do. Sometimes stopping is how you find your way back to being human again. Outside, the wind howled across the Montana plain, carrying snow and the promise of winter. In Maid, a broken man and a waiting child sat by the fire, and neither of them knew yet that stopping was only the beginning. That ahead lay battles and heartbreak and moments that would test every promise Cole had made. But they would face it together. And sometimes in a hard world full of people who walk past, together is enough. The cabin on McAllister Ranch sat at the edge of the world, or so it seemed to Grace in those first cold mornings when the sun rose over mountains that touched heaven and cast shadows long enough to swallow a little girl whole. 29 days until the custody hearing. Grace marked them on the cabin wall with a piece of charcoal, one line for each day that stood between her and whatever came next. Each morning she woke and crossed off another line, counting down to a future she could not see and did not understand. Cole watched her do this every morning and said nothing, because sometimes the only thing you can give a child is the illusion of control when everything else has been taken away. The work on the ranch was hard and honest. Cole rose before dawn and worked until dark, mending fences that winter had broken, training horses that had forgotten how to trust, doing the 1,000 small tasks that keep a ranch alive when the land itself seems determined to kill it. Grace went with him everywhere. She sat on fence rails and watched him work with horses that wanted to buck and bite and run. She learned that gentleness was stronger than force, that patience could break what violence never could. She learned the names of tools and the sounds horses made when they were calm versus afraid. On the third day, Cole lifted her onto the back of an old mare named Patience, steady and slow and perfect for a child who had never ridden before. "Hold the reins like this," he said, showing her. "Not too tight. The horse can feel your fear in your hands. What if I fall? Then you get back up. That's how you learn everything worth knowing." Grace gripped the reins, and Patience walked slow circles around the corral while Cole watched, and something in his chest loosened just slightly, like a knot that had been tied for 8 years was finally beginning to come undone. But Silver Creek was not done with them yet. On the 5th day, Sheriff Dobbs rode out to the ranch. He was 50 years old, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that looked everywhere except at the people he was talking to. He sat on his horse and held out an envelope. "Custody hearing. December 10th, County Courthouse, 9 in the morning. Victor Harlow versus Cole Brennan for guardianship of Grace McKenna." Cole took the envelope without opening it. "I'll be there." Sheriff Dobbs shifted in his saddle. "Look, Brennan, I don't know you. I don't know your story. But I know Victor Harlow. He's got lawyers. He's got the judge. He's got everything he needs to win this. Then why are you here warning me?" "Because—" Sheriff Dobbs finally looked at him. "Because I've seen what happens to the children he takes, and I've stopped being able to sleep at night." He rode away before Cole could respond, dust rising behind his horse like the ghosts of all the things the sheriff had failed to stop. That evening, Cole rode into Silver Creek to see Doc Hayes. Grace stayed with Samuel McAllister's wife, Martha, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had lost 3 children of her own and still had room in her heart for someone else's grief. Doc Hayes was in his office upstairs, surrounded by books of law that he could not practice because he was a doctor, not a lawyer. But he read them anyway because knowledge was the only weapon he had. "Tell me the truth," Cole said. "What are my chances?" Doc Hayes removed his spectacles and cleaned them, that ritual he did when the truth was hard. "Honestly, maybe 20%. Victor has blood rights. He has wealth. He has standing in the community. You have a job you've held for 5 days and a cabin you don't own. What do I need to change those odds? Character witnesses. People who will testify that you're fit to raise a child, and Victor is not. You need to prove you can provide stability, safety, a future. And you need to prove that Victor is a danger to Grace. Can you testify?" "I will." Doc Hayes put his spectacles back on. "But I'm one voice. You need more." "Who else?" "Ruth Chen will speak for you. She knows what it's like to be sold. But she's Chinese, and there are judges who won't give her testimony full weight." He paused. "You need Father O'Brien. You need McAllister. You need people whose word carries authority in a courtroom. I'll get them." Doc Hayes looked at him for a long moment. "There's something else you should know. Victor has been asking questions about you, about your past, about why a cavalry scout would become a drifter. If he finds out about Wyoming, about your wife and daughter, he'll use it against you. Let him find out." Cole stood up. "The truth is, I failed them. I left them behind, and they died. I've been running from that for 8 years, but I'm not running anymore. Running from guilt and facing it in a courtroom are 2 different things. Then I'll learn the difference." Cole walked downstairs and found Ruth Chen closing up the kitchen. She looked up when he entered. "Mr. Brennan, you look like a man with questions. I need your help at the hearing. Doc Hayes said you'd be willing to testify." Ruth set down the dish she was washing. "Sit." They sat at the same table where Grace had eaten her first real meal in 18 days, where she had cried for a father who would never come home, where everything had changed. "I will testify," Ruth said. "I will tell them what Victor is, what he does, what will happen to Grace if he takes her." "Thank you. But you need to understand something." Ruth leaned forward. "Men like Victor do not lose gracefully. If we fight him in court and win, he will find other ways to hurt us. This town depends on his money. his businesses, his goodwill. If we become his enemies, we will pay for it. I know. Do you? Ruth's eyes were hard. Because I've already paid. 20 years ago, I was sold just like Victor wants to sell Grace. I was 15 years old. I survived because someone helped me escape. But the cost of that escape was everything I had known, everyone I loved. Freedom is not free, Mr. Brennan. It costs everything, and then it costs more. I'm willing to pay. It's not just you paying, it's Grace. It's everyone who helps you. Are you prepared for that? Cole thought about Rose, about Emily, about the moment he chose to scout ahead instead of staying close, about 8 years of paying for one decision. Yes. Ruth nodded. Then we fight. The next morning, Cole asked Samuel McAllister for time to ride into Silver Creek. McAllister granted it without question, because he was the kind of man who understood that some things mattered more than work. Cole found Father O'Brien at the Catholic Church on the hill, a small wooden building with a crooked cross and stained glass windows that caught the morning light like captured prayers. Father O'Brien was 58 years old, with white hair and hands scarred from years of building churches and burying the dead and trying to bring light to places that preferred darkness. "Mr. Brennan, I've been expecting you." They sat in the front pew, beneath a crucifix that had seen more suffering than salvation in this hard land. "I need you to testify at the custody hearing," Cole said. "To tell the judge that I'm fit to raise Grace and Victor is not." Father O'Brien was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke, and his voice was heavy with the weight of things he had seen and could not unsee. "I will testify. But I need to tell you something first, something I have kept to myself for too long." Cole waited. 5 years ago, a girl named Sarah came to Silver Creek, 9 years old, orphan. Her parents died of cholera on the wagon train west. Victor took her in, said he would care for her. 6 months later, she was gone. He said she went to live with family in Denver. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Father O'Brien's hands tightened on the wooden pew. 2 years ago, I was in Denver. I saw Sarah. She was working in a house that no child should even know exists. She did not recognize me, or maybe she did and chose not to remember. I tried to help her. She ran. Father O'Brien looked at Cole. "I have carried that failure every day since. I will not carry another." "How many others that I know of?" 4. "That I suspect?" "More. Victor is careful. He chooses children nobody will miss. Orphans, indigents, children whose deaths or disappearances raise no alarms. And the law does nothing? The law belongs to men with money, Mr. Brennan. And Victor has more money than most. Then we change that." Father O'Brien smiled, but there was no joy in it. "You cannot change the law in 29 days. Number. But I can make enough noise that the law has to pay attention." Cole rode back to the ranch with 3 witnesses promised. Doc Hayes, Ruth Chen, Father O'Brien. 3 voices against a man who owned half the town and most of the people in it. It would have to be enough. The days passed like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, slipping away no matter how tightly you gripped. Grace grew stronger, color returned to her cheeks. She laughed one afternoon when a calf tried to nurse from patience, confused about which animals gave milk and which ones did not. The sound of that laughter stopped Cole in his tracks. It had been so long since he had heard a child laugh that he had forgotten what it sounded like, forgotten that joy was possible even in the shadow of coming darkness. That night, Grace asked him about the scars on his hands. "How did you get those?" Cole looked at his palms, at the white lines that crisscrossed his skin like a map of all the times he had held reins too long, worked too hard, tried to outrun the past through physical labor. Working, living, making mistakes and learning from them. Does it hurt? Not anymore. Cole paused. Pain has a way of fading if you let it. Grace traced one of the scars with her small finger. Papa had scars too, on his back. He said they were from when he was young and stupid. What did he mean? Grace's face went serious. He said he used to fight people who said mean things about where we came from. But Mama told him fighting never fixes what's broken inside. You have to fix that part yourself. Your mama was smart. Papa said she was the smartest person he ever knew. Grace looked up at him. Do you think they're together now, in heaven? Cole had stopped believing in heaven 8 years ago, stopped believing in a God who would let a woman and child freeze to death in the snow. But he looked at Grace's face, at the hope there, and he could not take that away from her too. I think if there is a heaven, they're together, and I think they're watching you, making sure you're okay. Then they know about you. Grace said it like a fact, simple and certain. They know you stopped. Cole felt something break open in his chest, something that had been frozen for so long he had forgotten it was there. I hope so, he said quietly. On the 15th day, Victor Harlow sent a message. It came through Sheriff Dobbs, who rode out to the ranch again, this time with reluctance written across his face like a confession. Victor wants to talk, says he has a proposition. I'm not interested. You should hear it. Sheriff Dobbs shifted his weight. He's offering money. $500. You take it, you ride out, and Grace goes with him. No lawyers, no court, no trouble. And Grace gets sold to Clayton Burke in Denver. Sheriff Dobbs looked away. That's not my business. Then what is your business, Sheriff? Collecting bribes? Looking the other way while children disappear? Sheriff Dobbs' face went red. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what Victor can do to a man who crosses him. Then tell me. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was hollow. I had a wife once, Mary. She saw things. Victor's business with the children. She was going to testify, going to tell the territorial marshal. 2 weeks later, she fell down the stairs in our house, broke her neck. The doctor said it was an accident. Cole felt ice in his veins. Was it? Sheriff Dobbs met his eyes, and in that moment, Cole saw all the things the sheriff had chosen not to see, all the deals he had made with his conscience to survive. I don't know, and that's the worst part. I don't know, and I've spent 5 years afraid to find out. So you let children disappear to keep yourself safe. Sheriff Dobbs flinched like he had been struck. I'm not proud of what I've become, Mr. Brennan, but I've also stayed alive. You might want to think about that. He rode away, and Cole stood in the cold afternoon air, understanding for the first time exactly what kind of war he had entered. This was not just about law and custody and what was right. This was about power and fear, and how far a man would go to protect his empire. That night Cole sat with Grace by the fire and told her the truth, because she deserved truth even when it was hard. Victor wants me to take money and leave. He wants you to go with him. Grace's face went pale. Will you? No. Why not? Because I promised I wouldn't leave, and because some things matter more than money or safety or staying alive. Some things matter more than everything else. Like what? Like you. Grace was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Then she looked at him with eyes that were older than they should be. Are you scared? Cole thought about lying, about pretending he was brave enough for both of them. But Grace had lived through 18 days on cold steps waiting for a father who would never come. She had earned honesty. Yes, I'm scared. Scared I won't be good enough. Scared the judge will say you have to go with Victor. Scared I'll fail you the way I failed my own daughter. You had a daughter? The words came hard like pulling arrows from old wounds. Her name was Rose. She was 6 years old, just like you, and she died because I left her behind when I should have stayed. Grace moved closer to him, small and warm in the firelight. But you didn't leave me. No, and you won't. Cole wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Number 1, I won't. On the 20th day, everything changed. Cole was working in the south pasture when Marshal Tom Garrett rode up. He was 55 years old, Cole's commanding officer from the cavalry days, a man who had saved Cole's life twice and never once asked for thanks. They had not seen each other in 7 years. Cole, Tom said, dismounting. His voice carried the weight of old friendship and new worry. We need to talk. They walked to the fence line, out of earshot of the other ranch hands. "Doc Hayes sent me a telegram. Told me what you're doing. Told me about the girl." Cole nodded. "And?" "And I came to tell you something you need to know." Tom looked out at the mountains. "I've been tracking Clayton Burke for 2 years. Federal case, human trafficking. He's been buying children from Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, selling them to whoever pays. Some become servants. Some become worse." "How many children?" 43 that we can prove. Maybe twice that we can't." Cole felt sick. "And Victor Harlow?" "Is one of Burke's main suppliers. Has been for 6 years. We've been building a case, but it's slow. These men are careful. They hide behind legitimate businesses, legal documents, blood relations. Can you arrest them?" "Not yet. We need more evidence." "More witnesses." Tom looked at him. "But your custody hearing might give us that. If we can get Victor on record, under oath, we might be able to use his testimony to bring down the entire network." "So Grace becomes bait." Tom's face hardened. "I would never ask that of a child. But if you're already fighting this battle, then maybe we can make it count for more than just one little girl." Cole thought about Sarah working in that house in Denver. Thought about 43 children whose names he did not know, whose faces he had never seen, whose lives had been bought and sold like cattle. "What do you need from me?" "Testify about what Victor tried to do. Get him to respond. Make him angry enough to slip up." Tom paused. "And keep Grace safe. Because if Victor realizes we're closing in, he'll move fast. And he'll be willing to kill to protect himself." The words hung in the cold air like frost. "I'll keep her safe. I know you will." Tom mounted his horse. "One more thing. Victor's been digging into your past. He knows about Wyoming, about Emily and Rose. He's going to use it against you in court. I know. Can you handle that?" Cole looked back at the cabin where Grace was inside learning to read with Martha McAllister, safe and warm and beginning to believe that maybe the world was not entirely cruel. "I'll have to." Tom rode away and Cole stood alone at the fence line, understanding that this fight was bigger than he had known, that Grace was not just one child but the key to saving dozens more, and that everything depended on a custody hearing 9 days away. The weight of it should have crushed him. Instead, it made him stand straighter. Because for the first time in 8 years, Cole was fighting for something other than survival. He was fighting for redemption. The days grew colder. Snow came early that year, covering the ranch in white that glittered like broken glass in the sunlight. Grace learned to throw snowballs and build snowmen, and do all the things 6-year-old children should do when winter is new, and the world has not yet taught them to fear the cold. But at night, the fear returned. Grace woke screaming 3 times in the 3rd week, crying for her papa, trapped in dreams where she was back on the steps and no one would stop, no one would help, no one would see her at all. Each time, Cole was there. He held her and told her she was safe and stayed until sleep came again, gentle and careful, like holding something made of glass that might shatter at any moment. On the 22nd day, Grace asked him a question while they were feeding the horses. "Cole, what happens if the judge says I have to go with Uncle Victor?" Cole stopped, the feed bucket heavy in his hands. "Then we appeal. We fight harder. We don't give up. But what if we lose all the fighting?" He knelt down so their eyes were level. "Then I will find another way. I will not let him take you, not to Denver, not anywhere. You promise?" Cole had learned that promises were dangerous things, that they could break you when you failed to keep them. But he looked at Grace's face, at the trust there, and he made the promise anyway. "I promise." That night, Samuel McAllister found Cole in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world," Samuel said. "Just one little girl." Cole ran his hand along the mare's neck. "Feels heavier than the world sometimes. That's because you care." Samuel leaned against the stall door. "I've been thinking about the hearing, about what you'll need to say." "What do you mean?" "The judge is going to ask you why you're doing this, why you stopped for a child you didn't know, why you're willing to fight a man like Victor. You need to have an answer that makes sense to him. The truth makes sense. Does it? Samuel's voice was gentle. Because the truth is you're trying to save Grace to make up for not saving Rose. And judges don't always understand that kind of truth. It sounds like you're using one child to fix your guilt about another. Cole felt anger flare. That's not what this is, isn't it? At least a little? The words hit hard because they carried truth. Cole sat down on a hay bale, suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. Maybe at first, he admitted. Maybe when I saw her on those steps, I saw Rose. But Grace isn't Rose. She's her own person. And I'm not trying to replace my daughter. I'm trying to give this child the chance Rose never got. The chance to grow up, to have a future, to know that someone cared enough to stay. Samuel nodded. That's what you tell the judge. Not that you're fixing the past, that you're building a future. The mare shifted, restless, and Cole stood to check on her. Life kept moving forward whether you were ready or not. Children were born. Others died. And some, if you were lucky, you got the chance to save. On the 25th day, 4 days before the hearing, Victor Harlow came to the ranch. He arrived in a fine carriage with polished wood and brass fittings, pulled by horses that had never known hard work or hunger. He wore a black suit and carried a silver-topped cane, though he did not need it. The cane was for show, for the image of a gentleman that he cultivated like a poisonous garden. Samuel McAllister met him at the property line, his ranch, his rules. You're not welcome here, Harlow. Victor smiled. I'm not here to make trouble, Samuel. I'm here to see my niece. The law says I have that right. The law says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're right. Nevertheless, Victor's smile did not waver. I'd like to see Grace, just for a few minutes, to let her know that I care, that I want what's best for her. Cole walked up, Grace behind him, her hand gripping his coat. She doesn't want to see you. Victor's eyes found Grace, and his expression shifted into something that might have been mistaken for kindness if you did not look too closely. Hello, Grace. I'm so sorry about your father. He was a good man, my dear sister's only child, and it breaks my heart that he's gone. Grace said nothing. I know you're confused right now. Victor took a step closer. I know this stranger has filled your head with ideas, but I'm your family, your blood, and I want to take care of you. I want to give you a home. I have a home, Grace said quietly. This? Victor gestured at the ranch, at the rough cabin, at the life that was honest but hard. This is not a home, child. This is poverty pretending to be kindness. I can give you a real home, with fine clothes and good food and an education, with a future. I don't want your future. The words came out small but firm, and Victor's mask slipped for just a moment. Cole saw it, the flash of anger, the calculation, the recognition that persuasion was not going to work. I see. Victor straightened. Well, I suppose we'll let the judge decide what you want. Children so rarely know what's best for them. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Cole. You know what's interesting, Mr. Brennan? I've been learning about you, about your past, about Wyoming Territory, about a wagon train that trusted you to guide them safely, about how 12 people died because you made a bad decision, including your own family. Cole's hands tightened into fists. The judge is going to hear about that. About how you abandoned your wife and daughter to scout ahead. About how you left them behind in a blizzard. About how they froze to death waiting for you to come back. Victor's voice was smooth, cruel. And then he's going to ask himself if a man who let his own child die in the snow is really fit to raise someone else's. Cole took a step forward. Samuel McAllister put a hand on his shoulder, holding him back. Victor smiled. I thought that might get a reaction. See you in court, Mr. Brennan. I look forward to watching you lose everything. Again. He climbed into his carriage and rode away, leaving only wheel tracks in the snow and the echo of words designed to destroy. Grace looked up at Cole. Is it true? Did your daughter die?" Cole knelt down so his eyes were level with hers. "Yes, her name was Rose. She was your age, and she died because I made a choice I thought was right, but turned out to be wrong. I've regretted it every day since. But you stayed with me. Because I couldn't save Rose. But maybe I can save you. Maybe that's what redemption looks like. Getting a second chance to do the right thing." Grace threw her arms around his neck, and Cole held her and felt the weight of two little girls, one dead and one living, one past and one future, both asking him to be better than he had been. That night Cole could not sleep. He sat outside the cabin watching the stars and thinking about the hearing that was 4 days away. Thinking about Victor's words, thinking about the judge who would decide Grace's future based on a past Cole could not change. Samuel McAllister found him there near midnight. "Can't sleep either," the old rancher said, sitting down beside him. "Too much to think about. Victor got to you today. He told the truth. I did abandon my family. I did let them die." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "You know what I learned in 50 years of ranching? That beating yourself up for past mistakes doesn't fix anything. It just makes you useless for the present. The present is a courtroom in 4 days where a judge decides if I'm fit to raise a child. And you're worried he'll say, no. I'm terrified he'll say yes." Cole looked at the older man. "What if Victor's right? What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail Grace the way I failed Rose?" Samuel pulled out his pipe, packed it with tobacco, lit it slowly. "You want to know the difference between you and Victor Harlow?" "What?" "You're asking if you're good enough. Victor never asks that question because he already knows he's not and he doesn't care." Samuel puffed on his pipe. "Grace doesn't need perfect, Cole. She just needs someone who shows up, someone who tries, someone who loves her enough to fight. What if trying isn't enough? Then you try harder. That's all any of us can do." They sat in silence for a long time. Two men who had lived long enough to know that life was mostly about showing up when it would be easier to leave, about trying when failure seemed certain, about loving when your heart had already been broken beyond repair. The final 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Doc Hayes coached Cole on what to say. Ruth Chen and Father O'Brien prepared their testimonies. Marshal Tom Garrett gathered evidence. On the 28th day, the night before the hearing, Cole woke to silence, the wrong kind of silence. He walked to Grace's room. The bed was empty. The window was open. Snow blew in, covering the floor in white. On the pillow, a note in handwriting that was not Grace's. "Stop fighting, or you'll never see her again." Cole's hands shook as he read it. Shook. Then he ran outside, barefoot in the snow, shouting Grace's name into the darkness. But the only answer was the wind. And somewhere in the night, a little girl who had already waited 18 days was waiting again, this time not knowing if anyone would come. Cole did not sleep that night. He saddled Sorrow in the dark, his hands moving with the automatic precision of a man who had tracked people across territories when minutes meant the difference between life and death. The snow had stopped an hour ago. Fresh tracks led from the cabin window. 2 sets, one small, dragged. One large, a man's boots, leading north. Samuel McAllister emerged from his house, rifle in hand. "I'm coming with you." "No." Cole's voice was flat. "Stay here. If I don't come back with her, tell Marshal Garrett where I went." The tracks led through the forest, clear in the moonlight. Cole read them the way other men read books. The man was heavy, maybe 200 pounds. Moving fast but not running, confident. The small tracks showed resistance at first, then stopped struggling. Unconscious or terrified into stillness. 5 miles out, the tracks met a road. Wagon tracks, fresh, heading toward Red Lodge. Red Lodge had the nearest train station, 30 miles north. If Victor got Grace on that train, she would disappear into the network Marshal Garrett had spent 2 years breaking. Different name, different city, gone. Cole pushed Sorrow harder than he should have, harder than was safe in the dark on icy roads. But 8 years ago, He had been cautious. He had chosen the safe route, the smart route. And Rose had died while he was being careful. Not again. Dawn broke cold and gray as Cole reached the outskirts of Red Lodge. The train station sat at the edge of town, a small building with a water tower and a platform where people waited for trains that would take them to places that promised more than Montana ever could. He saw the wagon first. Then he saw them. Victor Harlow stood on the platform, one hand gripping Grace's arm. She was awake now, struggling, her mouth gagged with cloth. Sheriff Dobbs stood beside Victor, a gun on his hip, looking sick but compliant. The train whistle sounded in the distance. 5 minutes, maybe less. Cole dismounted and walked toward them. His hand rested on the revolver at his hip, but he did not draw it. Not yet. Victor saw him and smiled. That terrible, confident smile of a man who had never lost. "Mr. Brennan, I admire your persistence, but this is over. Grace is my blood. The law says so. And tomorrow, when you don't show up to court, the judge will rule in my favor by default. Let her go." "Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of the sheriff? In front of witnesses?" Victor's smile widened. "You're not a killer, Brennan. You're a coward who let his family die. You won't do anything." Cole took another step forward. "You're right. I'm not a killer. Then we're done here." Victor turned toward the approaching train. "But I'm also not walking away." Cole moved, not toward Victor, toward Grace. Victor yanked her backward. Sheriff Dobbs drew his gun, hands shaking. "Don't!" Dobbs's voice cracked. "Don't make me shoot you, then don't." Cole kept walking. "Shoot me or don't." "But I'm taking her." The train was close now, 200 yards. The whistle screamed. Grace suddenly bit down hard on Victor's hand through the gag. He yelped, his grip loosening. She twisted, small and desperate, and broke free. She ran toward Cole. Victor lunged after her. His boot caught on the platform edge. He fell. Onto the tracks. The train was 100 yards away, 50. The engineer saw, pulled the brake, but momentum does not stop for human mistakes. Cole had 2 seconds to decide. He jumped. His hands found Victor's coat. He pulled hard, his cavalry training giving him strength he did not know he still had. They rolled off the tracks together just as the train roared past, so close Cole felt the wind tear at his clothes. They lay in the dirt, both breathing hard. "Why?" Victor gasped. "Why did you save me?" Cole stood slowly. "Because Grace was watching. And I want her to know that being a good man means doing the right thing even for people who don't deserve it." Sheriff Dobbs had dropped his gun. His hands were on his knees and he was crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have stopped him years ago. Yes." Cole picked up Grace, held her tight. "You should have." Marshal Garrett arrived 20 minutes later with 2 deputies. They arrested Victor and Sheriff Dobbs both. The train passengers gave statements. The conductor testified about what he had seen. It was over. Grace clung to Cole as they rode back toward Silver Creek. She had not spoken since he found her, and he did not push. Sometimes silence was safer than words. Halfway home, she finally whispered, "You came back. I promised I would. Uncle Victor said you'd run away, that you'd leave me like you left your daughter." Cole stopped the horse. He turned Grace so she could see his face. "I will never leave you. Never. Do you understand?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. The custody hearing was postponed for 1 week while Victor and Dobbs sat in jail. When it finally happened, it was not really a hearing at all. It was justice. The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises, of all the times justice had been blind in the wrong ways, looking past suffering because it was easier than seeing it. Judge Morrison adjusted his spectacles and opened the file before him. The paper rustled like dry leaves, like the sound winter makes when it promises to be long and cruel. "Mr. Harlow, you may present your case." Victor's lawyer stood. His name was Edward Sinclair, and he wore confidence like an expensive coat, tailored to fit perfectly, designed to impress. He was 50 years old and had spent 30 of those years learning how to make wrong sound like right. Your Honor, this case is simple. Victor Harlow is Grace McKenna's blood uncle, sole surviving relative, a man of means and standing in this community. He seeks custody of his late sister's granddaughter, a child he has every legal and moral right to raise. Sinclair walked to the center of the courtroom, his boots clicking on the wooden floor like a clock counting down. Mr. Brennan, by contrast, is a stranger, a drifter who rode into Silver Creek less than a month ago. He has no blood relation to the child, no history with her family, no legal standing whatsoever. He paused for effect. What he does have is a past marked by tragedy and poor judgment. Cole felt Grace's eyes on him from where she sat in the front row. He kept his face still, his hands steady on his knees, even as Sinclair's words landed like blows. 8 years ago, Mr. Brennan was employed as a cavalry scout, leading a wagon train of 40 settlers through Wyoming territory. When a blizzard struck, Mr. Brennan made a decision. He left the wagon train, including his own wife and daughter, to scout ahead for a safer route. The courtroom was silent. Even the dust motes seemed to hang motionless in the pale light from the windows. 12 people died in that blizzard, Your Honor. 12 people, including Mr. Brennan's 6-year-old daughter, Rose, and his wife, Emily. They froze to death, waiting for him to return. Sinclair turned to look at Cole. And for 8 years since, Mr. Brennan has been running. No permanent address. No steady employment. No ties to any community. Until he saw Grace McKenna sitting on those steps and decided she could somehow absolve him of his guilt. "Objection," Doc Hayes said, standing up. Doc Hayes was not a lawyer, but Judge Morrison allowed it because Silver Creek was a small town, and sometimes you worked with what you had. "On what grounds, Dr. Hayes?" Mr. Sinclair is speculating about Mr. Brennan's motivations rather than presenting facts. Judge Morrison nodded. Sustained. "Stick to facts, Mr. Sinclair." "Very well. The facts are these. Victor Harlow is a respected businessman who owns property and enterprises in Silver Creek. He has the means to provide Grace with education, comfort, and a future. Cole Brennan is a man with $40 to his name, a borrowed cabin, and a job he's held for less than a month. The law is clear. Blood relations take precedence, especially when the alternative is a transient with a history of abandoning those in his care." Sinclair sat down, satisfied. Judge Morrison looked at Cole. "Mr. Brennan, do you have representation?" Cole stood. "No, Your Honor, just myself and some people willing to speak on my behalf." "Then present your case." Cole walked to the center of the courtroom. He was not a man of words. He had spent 8 years speaking as little as possible, letting silence fill the spaces where explanations should have been. But Grace was watching, and sometimes you found words when you needed them most. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Sinclair said about Wyoming is true. I did leave my family. They did die. I have been running ever since." He paused. "But I'm not running anymore." "Why not?" "Because 18 days ago I saw a little girl sitting on cold steps, starving and alone, while an entire town walked past. And I realized that running doesn't fix anything. It just means you're not there when it matters." Judge Morrison leaned back. "Noble sentiment, Mr. Brennan, but sentiment doesn't raise children. Money does. Stability does. What can you offer Grace that Mr. Harlow cannot?" Cole looked at Grace, then back at the judge. "A chance to not be sold." The courtroom erupted. Sinclair shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that is a slanderous accusation without any foundation. Sit down, both of you." Judge Morrison's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Brennan, you will support that statement with evidence or withdraw it." "I have witnesses, Your Honor." "Then call them." Cole turned to Doc Hayes, who stood and walked forward. Doc Hayes had delivered half the babies in Silver Creek and closed the eyes of the other half when they died. He had earned the town's respect through 50 years of showing up when called, no matter the hour or the weather. "Dr. Hayes, how long have you known Grace McKenna?" "Since she arrived in Silver Creek 3 months ago with her father. I examined her when Patrick McKenna brought her to my office. Healthy child, well cared for. Loved. And after Patrick's death? Doc Hayes's face hardened. I saw her on the 18th day of her waiting. She had lost 9 pounds. She was dehydrated, hypothermic, showing signs of severe malnutrition. Another 3 days, and she would have died on those steps. And where was Victor Harlow during those 18 days? Doc Hayes looked directly at Victor, across the street in his saloon, watching, waiting for her to get weak enough that no one would question what happened to her. Your Honor, Sinclair stood again. This is speculation, is it? Doc Hayes pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is the death certificate for Patrick McKenna, dated November 1st. 16 days before Cole Brennan arrived. Victor Harlow was listed as next of kin. He collected $200 in mining insurance. And he told no one that Patrick was dead. He let that child sit on those steps, believing her father was coming back. Why would he do that? Judge Morrison asked. Doc Hayes looked at Victor again. Because he's done it before. The courtroom went silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Explain. Cole gestured to Father O'Brien, who stood and walked to the front. The priest's white hair caught the light from the windows, giving him an appearance of someone caught between heaven and earth, trying to bring truth to a place that preferred comfortable lies. Father O'Brien, have you witnessed Victor Harlow take custody of orphan children before? Yes. I tried to help her. She ran from me. She had been trained to run from anyone who might ask questions. Your Honor, Sinclair's voice was sharp. Father O'Brien has no proof of any connection between that unfortunate girl and my client. This is circumstantial at best and slander at worst. Then let me provide proof. Everyone turned. Marshal Tom Garrett stood, his federal badge catching the light. He walked to the judge's bench and placed a stack of papers there. Your Honor, I am United States Marshal Thomas Garrett. For 2 years, I have been investigating a human trafficking ring operating in Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. The ring is run by a man named Clayton Burke, currently in federal custody in Denver. Judge Morrison picked up the papers, scanning them. What does this have to do with this case? Marshal Garrett turned to face Victor. Because Victor Harlow is one of Burke's suppliers. We have Burke's ledgers. 4 children purchased from Silver Creek over 6 years, $500 each. All transactions brokered by Victor Harlow. Victor stood, his face red. This is absurd. I have never dealt with any such person. These accusations are. Then explain this. Marshal Garrett held up a telegram. This is a wire transfer from Clayton Burke to Victor Harlow. $500, dated June 15, 1885. The same week, a boy named Thomas disappeared from Silver Creek after Victor took custody. Sinclair stood. Your Honor, my client has not been charged with any crime. This hearing is about custody, not unproven allegations of. The allegations are proven, Marshal Garrett interrupted. Burke is cooperating with federal authorities. He has named Victor Harlow as one of his primary sources for children. The reason Mr. Harlow has not been arrested yet is because we wanted to see if he would attempt to take Grace, if he would lead us to other buyers in his network. You used this child as bait? Judge Morrison's voice was ice. No, Your Honor. Cole Brennan's intervention was not part of our investigation. But when Dr. Hayes contacted me about the custody dispute, I recognized an opportunity to bring evidence before a court. Victor Harlow is going to be arrested today regardless of your ruling. But what happens to Grace depends on you. Judge Morrison looked at Victor. Mr. Harlow, do you have anything to say? Victor's composure had cracked. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold courtroom. This is a conspiracy. A drifter arrives in town, and suddenly I'm accused of crimes I never committed. He pointed at Cole. He wants this child to replace the daughter he killed. He's using her to ease his guilt, and you're all helping him. Judge Morrison turned to Cole. Mr. Brennan, why do you want custody of Grace? Cole had prepared an answer with Doc Hayes. Something about stability and providing a home, and all the right words that might convince a judge. But standing in that courtroom, with Grace's eyes on him, and the ghosts of his past surrounding him, he told the truth instead. Because she waited 18 days for someone to care, and I was the first person who did. Because I failed my daughter, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. But maybe I can keep from failing this one. Because I know what it's like to be left behind, and I won't do that to her." He looked at Grace. "I'm not a perfect man. I've made terrible mistakes, but I stopped when everyone else walked past, and I'll keep stopping every day for as long as she needs me." Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Grace. "Young lady, come up here, please." Grace stood slowly. She walked to the bench, small and brave, her blue dress clean but worn, her red hair catching the light like copper wire. Judge Morrison leaned down so he was closer to her level. "Grace, do you understand what's happening here?" "Yes, sir." "You're deciding who I live with." "That's right." "And I need to ask you something. Do you want to live with your Uncle Victor?" "No, sir." "Why not?" "Because he let me wait on those steps even though he knew Papa was dead." Grace's voice was clear, steady. "He watched me get cold and hungry, and he didn't help. Cole helped." Judge Morrison nodded. "And you want to live with Mr. Brennan?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because he stopped." Grace looked back at Cole. "And because he promised he wouldn't leave, and I believe him, even though he left his own daughter?" The question was cruel, but necessary. Grace thought about it, her face serious. "Papa used to say that people make mistakes, but what matters is if they learn from them." Grace looked at the judge. "Cole learned. He won't make that mistake again." "How do you know?" "Because he's scared he will. And people who are scared of doing the wrong thing try harder to do the right thing." Judge Morrison sat back, and something in his expression shifted. He had been prepared to make a judgment based on law and precedent, and what was proper. But sometimes a 6-year-old child understood truth better than all the lawyers in the world. "I need to deliberate. Court will recess for 30 minutes. He stood and walked to his chambers, and the courtroom erupted into conversation. Victor stormed out, Sinclair following him, already planning appeals and motions and all the legal maneuvers that might still save his client. Marshal Garrett approached Cole. "Whatever happens, Harlow is under arrest the moment we leave this building, but if the judge gives him custody, we'll have to let him take Grace until the criminal case proceeds. That could be weeks, months." Cole felt ice in his veins. "He won't hurt her." "I won't let him. You can't stop a court order." Cole looked at Marshal Garrett, and in his eyes was something that made the marshal take a step back. Something that spoke of 8 years of running, of guilt that had turned to steel, of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "Watch me." Before Garrett could respond, Judge Morrison's clerk appeared. "The judge is ready." They filed back into the courtroom. Grace sat beside Cole, her small hand in his large one. Doc Hayes and Ruth Chen and Father O'Brien sat behind them, a small army of people who had chosen to stand when sitting would have been safer. Judge Morrison entered and took his seat. His face was unreadable. "I have considered the arguments, the evidence, and the testimony. This is not an easy case. Blood relations carry weight in law and tradition, but so does the welfare of the child." Cole felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Mr. Harlow, you are Grace McKenna's legal next of kin. You have means and standing. But you also allowed a 6-year-old child to suffer on cold steps for 18 days while you waited for her to become weak enough to manipulate. Whether or not the allegations of human trafficking are proven in criminal court, your actions toward Grace show a callous disregard for her well-being." Victor's face went red, but he said nothing. "Mr. Brennan, you have very little to recommend you by traditional standards. You have limited means, limited history in this community, and a past that raises serious questions about your judgment." Cole felt Grace's hand tighten in his. "But you also have something Mr. Harlow does not. You have Grace's trust. You have the support of people in this community who have watched you care for her these past weeks. And most importantly, you have shown that you are capable of putting her needs above your own comfort." Judge Morrison looked directly at Cole. "Therefore, I am granting temporary custody to Cole Brennan pending a full review in 6 months. Mr. Harlow, you are denied custody. Furthermore, I am recommending to the Territorial Marshal that all of your assets be frozen pending investigation of the trafficking allegations." The courtroom erupted. Victor lunged toward the bench, shouting about injustice and conspiracies and all the rage of a man who had built an empire on cruelty and was watching it collapse. Marshal Garrett and 2 deputies grabbed him. "Victor Harlow, you are under arrest for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and child endangerment." As they dragged Victor away, still shouting, Cole felt Grace throw her arms around him. She was crying, but these were different tears, relief, joy. The kind of tears that came when you had been holding your breath for so long, you forgot what it felt like to breathe. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You didn't leave." Cole held her, and for the first time in 8 years, the weight on his chest lifted just slightly. Not gone, never gone, but bearable, because sometimes redemption does not mean erasing the past. It means doing better in the present. Outside the courthouse, the winter sun was bright and cold. News of the arrest spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. People who had walked past Grace on those steps now claimed they had always suspected something was wrong with Victor. People who had taken Victor's money now remembered they had never really trusted him. Ruth Chen approached as Cole and Grace stood on the courthouse steps. "Justice," she said simply. Then she looked at Grace. "You are welcome at my restaurant any time. Free meals for life. For both of you." Father O'Brien blessed them both, making the sign of the cross. Grace's father would be proud of her and of you. Doc Hayes shook Cole's hand. 6 months until the permanent hearing. Stay employed. Stay put. Keep taking care of her, and this will be final. I will. Samuel McAllister drove them back to the ranch in his wagon. Martha sat in the back with Grace, wrapped in blankets, already planning what they would do to celebrate. A party, she said, with the whole community. To show Grace she belongs here. Grace fell asleep on the ride, exhausted from the fear and the waiting and the relief that came after. Cole carried her into the cabin and put her to bed, tucking the blankets around her small frame. Martha stood in the doorway. "You did good today. We're not done yet. 6 months. You'll make it." Martha smiled. "You know why? Why? Because you're not doing this to fix yourself. You're doing it for her, and that makes all the difference." After Martha and Samuel left, Cole sat in the chair beside Grace's bed and watched her sleep. The cabin was quiet. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and gentle, not the killing kind that had taken Emily and Rose, but the kind that made the world clean and new. Grace stirred, opened her eyes. "Cole? I'm here. Will Uncle Victor come back?" "No, he's in jail. He can't hurt you anymore." Grace was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you stopped that day, on the steps. Me too." She closed her eyes again, already drifting back to sleep. "I love you, Cole." The words hit him like a physical blow. Simple words. 3 words that changed everything. He sat there, unable to speak, unable to move, feeling something break open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 8 years. "I love you too, Grace." But she was already asleep. And maybe that was better. Maybe some truths were easier to say when the other person could not hear the way your voice broke saying them. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Work on the ranch, Grace going to school in Silver Creek, riding with Cole each morning, learning reading and arithmetic and how to be around other children who did not know what it was like to wait on cold steps for someone who would never come. Victor's trial proceeded in Helena. Marshal Garrett sent regular updates. Burke had testified, providing details about the entire operation. 4 children sold, maybe more that could not be proven. Victor would spend the next 20 years in federal prison if he lived that long. Men who hurt children did not do well behind bars. Sheriff Dobbs resigned, turned in his badge, and left Montana Territory in the middle of the night, running from his own guilt the way Cole had run for 8 years. Doc Hayes was appointed temporary sheriff until the town could hold an election. By Christmas, Grace had gained back all the weight she had lost, and then some. Her cheeks were round and pink. Her laughter came easier. She still had nightmares sometimes, still woke crying for her papa, but they were less frequent now. Healing was slow, but it was happening. On Christmas Eve, the community gathered at the church. Father O'Brien had organized a celebration, and it seemed like everyone in Silver Creek had come. There was food and singing and children running between pews in that chaotic way that drives adults mad but makes them smile anyway. Grace stood at the front of the church with 3 other children preparing to sing. She had been practicing for weeks, wanting it to be perfect. When the time came, her voice rose clear and true, singing the Irish lullaby her father had taught her, the one her mother had sung before that. Tu ra lu ra lu ral, tu ra lu ra li. Tu ra lu ra lu ral, that's an Irish lullaby. Cole sat in the front pew, and he was not the only one crying. Ruth Chen wiped her eyes. Father O'Brien smiled through tears. Doc Hayes blew his nose loudly into his handkerchief. After the service, Grace ran to Cole. "Did I do good?" "You did perfect. Papa would have liked it." "Yes." Cole knelt down. He would have been very proud. Grace hugged him, then ran off to play with the other children, already forgetting the performance in the way children do, living entirely in the present moment while adults carry the past like stones in their pockets. Samuel McAllister approached with a glass of something that smelled strongly of whiskey. "Merry Christmas, Cole. Merry Christmas." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Grace play. Then Samuel spoke. "You know what I was thinking about today? That day you rode up to my ranch asking for work. I almost said no. Why didn't you? Because you told me the truth. About Wyoming, about your daughter. Most men would have lied." Samuel took a sip of his drink. "Truth is harder than lies, but it lasts longer. The permanent custody hearing is in 6 months. You worried?" Cole watched Grace laughing with another girl, their voices high and bright in the cold air. "Every day. But I'm also doing everything I can to be the kind of man who deserves to keep her. That's all any of us can do." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep showing up, keep trying. The rest will follow." Winter deepened. January and February were hard months, with snow that came in waves and cold that could kill a man if he was not careful. But the cabin stayed warm. Food stayed on the table. Grace kept going to school, kept learning, kept growing. In March, as the snow began to melt, Cole took Grace to visit her father's grave. They brought flowers, the first of the spring, small and brave in the warming earth. Grace knelt by the wooden cross. "Hi, Papa. I wanted you to know I'm doing good. I'm learning to read. I can write my name. And Cole taught me to ride a horse all by myself." She paused, as if listening. "I miss you every day, but I'm not sad all the time anymore. Cole says that's okay, that you'd want me to be happy." Grace looked back at Cole. "Is that right?" "That's right." Grace turned back to the grave. "I love you, Papa, and I'm going to keep singing your songs so I never forget." They stood there for a while, the two of them, bound by grief and hope and the promise of futures that might have been lost but were being rebuilt piece by piece, day by day. In April, Marshal Garrett visited. He brought news. Clayton Burke had been sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Victor Harlow to 25. The network had been broken. 43 children had been located. Most were being returned to families or placed in proper orphanages. Some, like Sarah, were too damaged to go back, but they were getting help, getting a chance to heal. "You started this," Garrett said to Cole. "If you hadn't fought for Grace, we never would have gotten the evidence we needed to bring them all down. I just wanted to save one little girl. You saved 43. Garrett put on his hat. "That's not nothing." After he left, Grace asked Cole what they had been talking about other children like you who needed help. Did you help them? In a way. By helping you, we helped them too. Grace thought about that. So when you stopped for me, you stopped for all of them. I suppose so. Then I'm glad you stopped. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. May brought warmth and green grass and the smell of earth waking up after a long sleep. The ranch came alive with new calves and foals and all the work that comes with spring. Grace spent her days helping Martha in the garden, learning to grow things, to nurture life from seeds that looked like nothing but held everything inside them. On June 10th, exactly 6 months after the first hearing, they returned to the courthouse. This time there was no drama, no victor, no accusations, just Judge Morrison, looking over the reports from Doc Hayes about Grace's health, from Father O'Brien about her schooling, from Samuel McAllister about Cole's employment and character. Mr. Brennan, I have reviewed everything. Judge Morrison looked at Cole over his spectacles. You have exceeded every requirement set before you. You have steady employment, a home, the support of your community, and most importantly, you have cared for Grace McKenna with dedication and love. He stamped a document with finality. I hereby grant you full and permanent custody. Grace McKenna is now legally your daughter. Congratulations. The word daughter hung in the air like music. Cole felt tears on his face and did not care who saw them. Grace was already hugging him, laughing and crying at the same time. Does this mean you're my papa now? She asked. If you want me to be. I do. Grace looked up at him. Can I call you papa? Cole's voice broke. Yes. She hugged him tighter. Papa. The word was medicine. The word was healing. The word was everything. They celebrated that night at Ruth Chen's restaurant. The entire town showed up, or so it seemed. There was food and music and toasts to new beginnings and second chances and all the things people say when they witness something that feels like grace in a hard world. Grace fell asleep on Cole's lap, exhausted from the excitement, one small hand still gripping his shirt. Doc Hayes looked at them and smiled. You did it, Cole. You stopped running. I had to. Cole looked down at Grace. She deserved better than someone who kept leaving. We all did. Doc Hayes raised his glass, to Grace, and to the man who loved her enough to stay. They drank to that, to staying, to stopping, to all the ordinary miracles that happen when people choose courage over comfort. 18 months later, winter of 1889. Silver Creek had changed. The mine had found a new vein of silver. People who had left came back. The town was alive again. And at the north edge of town, on a hill where you could see the whole valley, stood a building that had not been there before. 2 stories, white paint. A porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Over the door, carved into wood that Samuel McAllister had cut himself, were the words, Brennan Home for Children. Inside, there were 12 beds. A kitchen that always smelled of Ruth Chen's cooking. A classroom where Father O'Brien taught reading and arithmetic. A medical room where Doc Hayes examined scrapes and fevers and the invisible wounds that hurt worse than any broken bone. And in the main room by the fireplace, a rule written on the wall in Grace's careful handwriting. No child waits alone here. If you need help, we stop. Cole and Grace stood on the front steps on opening day. Grace was 8 now, taller, stronger, her red hair pulled back in braids that Martha McAllister had taught her to make. A wagon approached, Ruth Chen driving, and in the back, a boy, 7 years old, thin, eyes that had seen too much too soon. Grace walked down the steps to meet him. What's your name? Thomas. Grace held out her hand. I'm Grace. How long have you been waiting, Thomas? The boy's voice was barely a whisper. 3 days, at the train station. My parents were supposed to come, but Grace understood. She had lived that story. She knew how it ended when no one stopped. Come with me. She led him up the steps. I know someone who will help. Cole was waiting in the doorway. He knelt down, so he was eye level with Thomas. You hungry? The boy nodded. Come on then, let's get you fed. And as Thomas walked inside toward warmth and food and safety, Grace stood on the porch and watched. This was the legacy. Not just being saved, but learning to save others. Not just one man stopping, but building a place where stopping happened every day. And Grace, now 8 years old and strong and sure, helped welcome the children who came through those doors. Orphans, lost ones. Children nobody wanted, just like she had been. On opening day, a boy arrived, 7 years old, thin, scared. He had been found at the train station, waiting for parents who were never coming. Grace sat beside him on the front steps. "What's your name?" "Thomas." "I'm Grace. How long have you been waiting, Thomas?" The boy looked at her with eyes that were too old for his face. 3 days. Grace took his hand. "Come with me. I know someone who will help." She led him inside, where Cole was waiting with soup and bread and a warm bed and the promise that he would not have to wait alone anymore. Cole watched Grace comfort the boy, watched her share her story of 18 days on cold steps and the man who finally stopped. And he understood that this was the legacy, not just saving one child, but teaching that child to save others. Not just stopping once, but building a place where stopping happened every day. That evening, after Thomas was asleep and the house was quiet, Grace found Cole on the porch. "Papa, do you think my first papa knows about all this? About the home and the children we're helping?" Cole put his arm around her. "I think he knows. And I think he's proud of you." Grace leaned against him. "I used to be so angry that he left me, that he died. But now I understand that sometimes people leave not because they want to, but because they have to. And what matters is who stays after." She looked up at Cole. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching me how." They sat together in the cold evening air, watching the lights of Silver Creek below, and Cole thought about Rose, about Emily, about all the ghosts he had carried for 8 years. They were still there. They would always be there. But now they were not weights pulling him down. They were lights guiding him forward, because sometimes redemption is not about forgetting the past. It is about honoring it by doing better in the present. Sometimes healing means carrying your scars and choosing to let them make you gentle instead of hard. Sometimes love means staying when every instinct tells you to run. And sometimes, on a cold November day in a dying mining town, a broken man stops for a waiting child. And in that moment, both of their lives change forever. Not because stopping fixes everything, but because it's the first step toward fixing anything. Grace fell asleep against him, warm and safe and loved. Cole carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and whispered the words that had become his prayer, his promise, his purpose. "I'm here. I'm staying. You're safe." And for the first time in 8 years, Cole Brennan slept without nightmares, because he had finally learned the truth that had eluded him for so long. Redemption is not about deserving second chances. It is about taking them when they come, and never, ever letting go. The story of Cole Brennan and Grace McKenna would be told in Silver Creek for generations. About the man who stopped. About the girl who waited. About how sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the entire world. But the best part of the story, the part that mattered most, was not told in words. It was lived, every single day. In a little house on McAllister Ranch, where a father and daughter built a life from broken pieces, where lost children found home, where stopping became staying, and staying became love. And love, as it turned out, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.